The late afternoon sun painted the main street of Shoshone City, Wyoming territory, in hues of amber and gold as Darlene Evans stepped out of her father's mercantile store, her eyes catching on the lone figure tethering his horse at the hitching post across the way. The year was 1876, and like many frontier towns sprouting across the American West, Shoshone City was a place of opportunity and judgment in equal measure. For a woman like Darlene, educated back east, and returned to help her widowed father, the town's judgment could be particularly swift and unforgiving. Owen Tucker removed his dust-covered hat and wiped his brow with his sleeve before glancing up and meeting Darlene's gaze. Even from across the street, she could see the slight curve of his lips as he nodded in acknowledgement. The gesture sent a flutter through her chest that she'd been trying to ignore for weeks now. "You best not be making eyes at that drifter again," came Margaret Wilson's voice from behind her. The older woman, who owned the millinery shop next door, had appointed herself the moral compass of Shoshone City's female population. "A man like that has nothing to offer a lady of your standing." Darlene turned, smoothing her pale blue dress with practiced composure. "Mr. Tucker is a rancher now, Mrs. Wilson. He purchased the old Hargrove property last month." "Rancher," Margaret scoffed. "That man spent more time with his guns than with cattle. Everyone knows he rode with Farley's outfit before showing up here. Just because he's got himself some land doesn't change what he is." Owen Tucker's reputation had preceded him to Shoshone City. Tales of his time as a hired gun for wealthy ranchers in Colorado had traveled faster than he had. Though he'd never been charged with any crime, the whispers followed him like shadows. "Perhaps we should allow people the opportunity to be more than their past," Darlene said softly, her eyes drifting back to Owen, who was now speaking with the blacksmith. "Your father would be horrified to hear you defending him," Margaret replied. "A refined young woman like yourself needs a proper gentleman. What about Dr. Harris's son? He's returning from medical school in Philadelphia next month." Darlene offered a noncommittal smile before excusing herself. She had deliveries to make, orders to check, and ledgers to balance responsibilities that had fallen to her since returning from Vassar College 2 years ago. Her father's health had been declining, and though he wouldn't admit it, the mercantile would have faltered without her organizational skills and business acumen. As she walked back inside, the store bell jingling overhead, she couldn't help but think about what Mrs. Wilson had said. The town had indeed made its opinion of Owen Tucker clear from the moment he'd arrived 6 months ago. Yet there was something in his quiet demeanor that spoke to her, something in his eyes that told a different story than the one on everyone's lips. Inside the mercantile, her father, George Evans, was carefully wrapping a parcel for Mrs. Cooper, the banker's wife. At 58, with a full head of silver hair and kind eyes, George Evans was respected throughout the county. He had built the mercantile from nothing after moving west following the Civil War, in which he'd served as a Union quartermaster. "Ah, Darlene, there you are," he called as she entered. "Would you mind checking the back for that bolt of blue calico Mrs. Cooper ordered? I believe it arrived in yesterday's shipment." Darlene nodded and made her way to the storeroom, expertly navigating the stacks of crates and barrels. She located the fabric quickly but paused before returning, taking a moment to collect her thoughts. Her father had never explicitly forbidden her from speaking to Owen Tucker, but his disapproval was evident whenever the man's name was mentioned. Like most in town, he saw only the gunslinger, not the man trying to establish himself as something more. When she returned to the front, Mrs. Cooper was gone, and her father was serving another customer, Owen Tucker himself. Darlene's heart quickened as she approached, the bolt of fabric still in her arms. "Mr. Evans," Owen was saying, his voice low and measured, "I'll need supplies for fence mending. The northeast section's taken a beating from the weather." Her father's response was professionally polite but cool. "We've got posts in the back lot and wire in stock. How much will you be needing?" Owen listed his requirements, and Darlene couldn't help but notice his hands strong and weathered, but with a gentleness as he handled the ledger her father pushed across the counter. There was a story in those hands, she thought, one that involved more than the guns holstered at his sides. "Darlene," her father said, noticing her standing there, "please check the inventory on barbed wire. I believe we may need to order more after Mr. Tucker's purchase." She nodded and moved to the counter, setting down the fabric. As she opened the inventory book, she felt Owen's gaze on her. "Miss Evans," he said with a slight tip of his hat. "That's a fine-looking catalog you've got displayed in the window. Been thinking about ordering a proper desk for my place." His voice held a hint of the South, not heavy but noticeable Tennessee or Kentucky, perhaps. It was warm and unexpectedly educated for a man with his reputation. "We just received it last week from Chicago," she replied, meeting his eyes directly. They were a deep blue, serious yet with a spark of something that might have been humor. "I'd be happy to show you the furniture section if you'd like," her father cleared his throat pointedly. "Perhaps another time," Owen said, understanding the unspoken message. "I've got fence posts waiting." Darlene nodded, disappointed but not surprised. "Of course." Owen paid for his purchases and arranged for the larger items to be delivered to his ranch. As he turned to leave, he hesitated, then looked back at Darlene. "Miss Evans, I'm hosting a barn raising next Saturday. Lost the old one in that storm last month. If you and your father, of course, would care to attend, there'll be food and music after the work's done." Before Darlene could respond, her father stepped forward. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Tucker, but we have prior commitments." Owen's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Of course, good day to you both." With a final nod, he left the store. When the door closed behind him, Darlene turned to her father. "We don't have any commitments next Saturday." George Evans sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "Darlene, you know as well as I do that man isn't suitable company for you. He's trying to reinvent himself, and I respect that effort, but his past follows him. This town has a long memory." "And no capacity for forgiveness, it seems," she replied, more sharply than she intended. Her father's expression softened. "I'm only looking out for your well-being. A man with his history brings complications." "You taught me to judge people by their actions, not rumors," Darlene said, closing the inventory book with more force than necessary. "Since he arrived, Mr. Tucker has done nothing but work hard and mind his own affairs. There are plenty of respectable young men in this territory who would make appropriate suitors," her father countered. "James Harris will be returning soon, and I hear the new schoolteacher is unmarried." Darlene fought the urge to roll her eyes. At 24, she was already considered dangerously close to spinsterhood by frontier standards. That she had chosen to pursue education rather than marriage had been a source of gossip when she'd first returned from college. "I'm not interested in Mr. Harris or the schoolteacher," she said firmly. "And I wasn't suggesting that I was interested in Mr. Tucker either. I simply think it's unkind to judge a man based on gossip rather than his present conduct." Her father looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "You've always had a soft heart for strays and lost causes, just like your mother." His voice held affection despite his disapproval. "Promise me you'll be careful, Darlene. The world isn't always as forgiving as you'd like it to be." She nodded, knowing further argument would only distress him. But as she returned to her work, Darlene couldn't help wondering about Owen Tucker's story, the parts that weren't told in hushed voices over tea or whispered across the church pews on Sunday mornings. The following days passed in the routine that had become Darlene's life since returning to Shoshone City. Mornings at the Mercantile, afternoons spent teaching a small group of girls whose parents valued education, evenings with her father, often reading aloud from whatever new books had arrived from back east. It was on Thursday, while delivering an order to the miller's farm outside town, that Darlene encountered Owen again. She was driving her father's wagon along the rutted dirt road when she spotted a rider approaching from the direction of Tucker's ranch. Even at a distance, she recognized his straight-backed posture in the saddle. As they drew closer, Owen slowed his horse, a handsome chestnut gelding that pranced slightly at the bit. "Miss Evans," he called, removing his hat, "you're a fair way from town." She pulled the wagon to a halt. Deliveries for the Millers, she explained, gesturing to the crates behind her. My father's knee was bothering him today. Owen nodded, his eyes taking in the heavily loaded wagon. That's a lot for one person to handle. I manage just fine, Mr. Tucker, she replied, lifting her chin slightly. A smile touched his lips, the first genuine one she'd seen from him. I don't doubt it for a second. He glanced at the sky where dark clouds were gathering in the west, but there's weather coming. Would you mind some company on your delivery? That way you might beat the rain back to town. Darlene hesitated. Accepting his help would certainly add to the town's gossip, but the approaching storm looked serious, and the road could become treacherous when wet. I would appreciate the assistance, she decided. Thank you. Owen dismounted and tied his horse to the back of the wagon before climbing up beside her. He was careful to maintain a proper distance on the seat, but Darlene was still acutely aware of his presence, the scent of leather and open air that clung to him, the quiet strength in his movements. I heard about your father's knee, Owen said as they continued toward the Miller farm. War injury. Darlene nodded. Shiloh, it troubles him more in damp weather. I was too young for that fight, Owen replied, but my older brother wasn't. Did he survive? Darlene asked, realizing she knew nothing about Owen's family. A shadow crossed his face. No, Auntie Edam. He said nothing more on the subject, but Darlene understood some wounds never fully healed, even after 14 years. They rode in silence for a few minutes before Owen spoke again. I want to apologize for putting you in an awkward position with my invitation. It wasn't my intention to cause tension between you and your father. No apology needed, Darlene said. My father is protective, but he means well. Owen nodded. He has good reason to be cautious. A man's reputation is often the only thing folks have to judge him by out here. And if that reputation isn't entirely accurate, she asked, glancing at him. His blue eyes met hers, serious and contemplative. Then he has to prove otherwise through his actions. Words don't count for much without deeds to back them up. Is that what you're trying to do at the Hargrove place? Prove something? Owen was quiet for a moment, considering her question. I'm trying to build something lasting, he finally said. Something that's mine, earned honest and maintained the same way. Before Darlene could respond, they arrived at the Miller farm. Jacob Miller, a stout man in his 40s with a perpetually sunburned face, came out to greet them, his expression darkening slightly at the sight of Owen. Miss Evans, he said, pointedly ignoring Owen, didn't expect to see you making deliveries. Father's knee was acting up, she explained as she handed him the invoice. Mr. Tucker was kind enough to escort me, given the approaching storm. Miller grunted noncommittally, then called for his sons to unload the wagon. The two boys, teenagers who shared their father's stocky build, cast curious glances at Owen as they worked. While the wagon was being unloaded, Sarah Miller, Jacob's wife, invited Darlene inside for tea. Owen declined a similar invitation, saying he would check the wagon's wheels while he waited. Inside the Millers' modest home, Sarah immediately began questioning Darlene. Are you sure it's wise to be traveling alone with that man, the stories about him? Darlene set down her teacup with deliberate calm. Mr. Tucker has been nothing but a gentleman, Mrs. Miller. He saw a woman facing a storm and offered assistance. I would think that speaks well of his character. Sarah looked unconvinced. It's just that someone of your standing, your father must be worried sick. My father trusts my judgment, Darlene said, though this wasn't entirely true. Besides, Mr. Tucker is establishing himself as a rancher now. People can change. Some things don't change, Sarah replied darkly. A man who's lived by the gun doesn't easily set it aside. Darlene was spared from responding when one of the Miller boys burst in to announce that the storm was approaching quickly. Thanking Sarah for the tea, Darlene hurried outside where Owen was already at the wagon, ready to depart. Dark clouds now filled the western sky, and a cool wind whipped at their clothing as they climbed onto the wagon. They had traveled less than a mile when the first heavy raindrops began to fall. There's a line shack about half a mile ahead, Owen shouted over the rising wind. We can take shelter until the worst passes. Darlene nodded, too focused on controlling the increasingly nervous horses to argue. By the time they reached the small structure, little more than 4 walls and a roof used by ranchers during roundups, they were both soaked through. Owen quickly tended to the horses, securing them under a lean-to attached to the shack while Darlene went inside. The interior was sparse but clean. A small stove, a narrow cot, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs. She was attempting to light the stove with trembling hands when Owen entered. "Allow me," he said, taking the matches. His steady hands had the fire going in moments. "You're shivering. There should be some blankets in that trunk." Darlene found 2 rough wool blankets and handed one to Owen before wrapping herself in the other. They sat on opposite sides of the small room, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the rain hammering on the roof. "This isn't exactly proper," Darlene said after a moment, a nervous laugh escaping her. Owen's expression was serious. "Your reputation is safe with me, Miss Evans. As soon as the rain lets up, we'll head straight to town." "I wasn't suggesting," she began, then stopped, embarrassed. "I know you're an honorable man, Mr. Tucker." He looked up, surprise evident in his features. "You may be the only person in Shoshone City who thinks so." "Perhaps I see things others don't," she replied quietly. Owen studied her for a long moment. "And what is it you see, Miss Evans?" The question hung between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Darlene found herself wanting to cross the room to him, to erase the carefully maintained distance. Instead, she said, "I see someone trying to outrun his past and build a future. There's courage in that." Owen's gaze didn't waver. "Some pasts can't be outrun." "Then they must be faced," she said simply. A faint smile touched his lips. "You're not what I expected, Darlene Evans." It was the first time he'd used her first name, and the intimacy of it sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire or blanket. "What did you expect?" she asked. "Someone more easily swayed by public opinion," he admitted. "Someone who wouldn't risk her standing to defend a man the town has already judged." "I make my own judgments," Darlene said, "though I can't claim to know your full story." Owen was silent for a moment, then he rose and moved to the window, looking out at the rain. "I was 19 when I started riding with Farley, young, angry, looking for somewhere to belong after losing my family. Farley's men were hired to protect cattle barons' interests during the range wars. Sometimes that meant standing guard, sometimes it meant more." He turned back to face her. "I never killed a man who wasn't armed and threatening me or those I was hired to protect, but I won't pretend my hands are clean." "Why are you telling me this?" Darlene asked softly. "Because you deserve the truth, not rumors," he replied. "And because 3 years ago I watched a family burn in their cabin during a dispute I was part of. They weren't supposed to be their women and children." His voice faltered. "I quit that life the next day. Worked odd jobs, saved every penny, looked for somewhere to start fresh." Darlene's heart ached at the pain in his eyes. "Is that why you bought the ranch? To atone?" "Partly," he acknowledged, "but also because I remembered my father's farm before the war took him. How it felt to build something, to nurture life instead of taking it." He shook his head. "I don't expect forgiveness, Miss Evans. I just want a chance to live differently." "Everyone deserves that chance," she said firmly. Outside, the rain had lightened. Owen checked the window again. "We should head back before your father sends a search party." The return journey to Shoshone City was mostly silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The rain had stopped entirely by the time they reached the outskirts of town, though the streets were muddy and largely deserted. As they approached the mercantile, Darlene could see her father standing anxiously on the porch. When he spotted the wagon, relief flooded his features, quickly followed by concern when he recognized Owen beside his daughter. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Tucker," Darlene said formally as he helped her down from the wagon. Owen nodded, aware of George Evans's watchful gaze. "It was my pleasure, Miss Evans." He tipped his hat to her father. "Mr. Evans, your daughter is safely returned. The storm caught us, but we found shelter until it passed." George's expression was unreadable. "Thank you for looking after her, Tucker." Owen untied his horse from the back of the wagon and mounted in one fluid motion. With a final nod to them both, he rode off toward the livery stable. As soon as he was out of earshot, George turned to Darlene. Inside, now, once in the privacy of their living quarters above the store, he rounded on her. Do you have any idea what people will say? You, alone with that man during a storm. Nothing happened, Father, Darlene said firmly. Mr. Tucker was a perfect gentleman. He saw me facing bad weather and offered help, exactly what you would want any decent man to do. Decent men don't have his history, George replied, his voice tight with worry. I've already heard whispers from the Millers. Darlene felt a flash of irritation. News traveled fast in small towns, especially when it involved potential scandal. Then let them whisper, I've done nothing wrong and neither has Mr. Tucker. It's not about right or wrong, Darlene, it's about perception. Her father sank into his armchair, suddenly looking very tired. This town has been good to us. Your mother is buried here. Our livelihood depends on the goodwill of these people. Darlene knelt beside his chair, taking his weathered hand in hers. I understand that. But shouldn't we judge a man by who he is now, not who he was? George studied his daughter's face, his expression softening. You've always seen the best in people, just like your mother, he sighed deeply. I won't forbid you from speaking to the man. You're too old for such restrictions. But please be careful. Not everyone gets the fresh start they're seeking. He deserves the chance to try, Darlene said quietly. Her father nodded reluctantly. Get changed before you catch your death. I'll make us some tea. As Darlene changed out of her damp clothes, she found herself thinking about Owen's confession in the lined shack. He had trusted her with his darkest truth, not expecting absolution but offering honesty. There was a kind of courage in that. She thought, the courage to face one's past without excuses. By Saturday morning, the story of Darlene Evans and Owen Tucker's storm-delayed return had circulated throughout Shoshone City. As Darlene made her way to the mercantile, she was acutely aware of the stares and whispered conversations that followed her. Inside the store, her father was already serving Mrs. Wilson, whose eyes widened at the sight of Darlene. My dear, she exclaimed, I was just telling your father how concerned we all were when we heard about your ordeal, trapped in that awful storm with you know. Darlene smiled tightly. Hardly an ordeal, Mrs. Wilson. Mr. Tucker was kind enough to escort me during a delivery, and we waited out the worst of the storm in a lined shack. Everything was completely proper. Of course, dear, Mrs. Wilson replied, her tone suggesting exactly the opposite. Though I can't help but wonder what possessed you to accept his company in the first place. Before Darlene could respond, the store door opened, and Sheriff Thomas Hollister entered. A tall man with a salt and pepper mustache and an air of quiet authority, Hollister had served as Shoshone City's law enforcement since its founding. Morning, George, Miss Evans, he said, nodding to Mrs. Wilson as well. Just stopped by to see if that shipment of ammunition came in. Arrived yesterday, George replied, moving behind the counter. I'll fetch it for you. While her father was in the storeroom, Sheriff Hollister turned to Darlene. Heard you had a bit of excitement during the storm, Miss Evans. Nothing so dramatic, Sheriff, she replied evenly. Mr. Tucker simply offered assistance when he saw me facing bad weather. Hollister studied her with shrewd eyes. Tucker's been keeping to himself since he arrived. No trouble, pays his taxes, minds his business. He paused. Not what I expected, given the stories. Perhaps the stories aren't entirely accurate, Darlene suggested. Maybe so, Hollister conceded. Still, a man like that carries shadows. Best to be careful, Mrs. Wilson nodded emphatically. That's precisely what I was saying, Sheriff. A young woman of Darlene's standing should be more discerning about her company. I believe I'm capable of making my own judgments about character, Darlene said, her patience wearing thin. Sheriff Hollister gave her a considering look. Fair enough, Miss Evans, just offering friendly advice. When her father returned with the ammunition, the sheriff paid and departed, followed shortly by Mrs. Wilson, who couldn't resist a parting comment about the barn raising at Tucker's ranch that afternoon. I understand half the county is attending, she said. Curiosity, I suppose. Though I can't imagine why respectable families would want to associate with such a man. After she left, Darlene turned to her father. I think we should attend the barn raising. George Evans looked up sharply. Darlene, not to cause gossip, she interrupted, but to show that we judge people by their actions, not rumors. You've always taught me the importance of community, of helping neighbors. Tucker is hardly a neighbor, her father protested. His land borders the Johnsons, who have been our friends for years, Darlene pointed out, and he's trying to establish himself honestly. Isn't that what the West is supposed to be about? Fresh starts. George was silent for a long moment, considering. You're determined about this, aren't you? I am, Darlene admitted, and I think it's the right thing to do. Her father sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of her jaw and inheritance from himself, though he'd never admit it. Very well, we'll make an appearance, help with the raising, and leave before sundown. And you will remain in my sight at all times. Darlene smiled, restraining herself from hugging him in her excitement. Thank you, father, you won't regret it. I already do, he muttered, but there was a resigned affection in his voice that told her she had won. They arrived at the Hargrove, now Tucker Ranch, in the early afternoon. The property, situated in a picturesque valley with the Wind River Mountains as a backdrop, had been neglected for years before Owen purchased it. The old Hargrove house, a modest but solid two-story structure, showed signs of recent repairs. Fresh paint, new glass in the windows, a rebuilt porch. The barn site was already bustling with activity. Several wagons were parked nearby, and men were unloading lumber and tools. Women had set up tables under the trees, laden with food for the workers. Darlene was surprised by the turnout. Despite the gossip, it seemed many in the community had decided to support the effort, though whether from genuine goodwill or curiosity remained to be seen. Owen was directing operations, his deep voice carrying as he organized the men into teams. When he spotted Darlene and her father, he excused himself and approached them, removing his hat. Mr. Evans, Miss Evans, he greeted them, genuine surprise and pleasure in his eyes. I didn't expect to see you here. No neighbor of Shoshone City should have to raise a barn alone, George replied stiffly but not unkindly. Where do you need help? The framing crew could use another experienced hand, Owen said, gesturing toward where the barn's skeleton was taking shape. And Miss Evans, I can help with the food, Darlene offered, or whatever else is needed. Owen nodded. Mrs. Johnson is organizing the meal. I'm sure she'd welcome your assistance. As her father moved off to join the builders, Darlene made her way to the food tables where Rebecca Johnson, a cheerful woman in her 50s, was directing operations with the efficiency of a general. Darlene Evans, she exclaimed, I was hoping you'd come. These young girls need someone to show them how to properly organize a serving line. For the next few hours, Darlene threw herself into the work, helping prepare food for the hungry workers and assisting the younger women with their tasks. Occasionally, she would glance over at the barn site, where her father was working alongside other men from town. To her surprise, he seemed to be engaged in actual conversation with Owen, both men focused on securing a beam into place. As the afternoon progressed, the barn's framework took shape against the blue Wyoming sky. The atmosphere grew increasingly festive as the work continued, with someone producing a fiddle during a brief break, leading to impromptu dancing and laughter. Darlene was carrying a tray of water cups to the workers when she nearly collided with Owen, who had stepped back from the frame to examine their progress. Careful, he said, steadying the tray. Though a dousing might be welcome in this heat. He had removed his shirt like many of the men, and Darlene tried not to stare at the lean strength of his sun-bronzed torso or the faded scars that marked his skin, testaments to the life he'd led before. It's coming along well, she said, gesturing to the barn. Owen nodded, pride evident in his face. Better than I hoped. Your father knows his way around construction, said he built 3 barns back in Ohio before the war. He never mentioned that to me, Darlene said, surprised. Men have a way of opening up when their hands are busy, Owen replied with a slight smile. Thank you for coming, Darlene. It means more than I can say. The way he said her name soft, almost reverent, sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. I'm glad we came, she said honestly. Though I can't take credit, it was the right thing to do. Owen's eyes held hers. "You're making quite a statement being here. Not everyone would have the courage." "It's hardly courage to help a neighbor," she replied. "Is that what I am, a neighbor?" There was something in his voice, a question that went beyond the words themselves. Before Darlene could respond, Rebecca Johnson called her name, breaking the moment. With an apologetic smile, she hurried back to her duties, aware of Owen's gaze following her. As sunset approached, the barn stood nearly complete, the framework solid, the roof partially shingled. Work would continue the next day, but the major structural elements were in place, thanks to the many hands that had contributed. Tables were arranged in the yard for the communal supper, and lanterns were lit as twilight descended. Musicians set up in a cleared area, promising dancing after the meal. Darlene found herself seated between her father and Mrs. Johnson, with Owen at the far end of the table, surrounded by men discussing cattle prices and grazing rights. The conversation flowed easily, with only occasional awkward silences when someone made a reference to Owen's past. After the meal, as the music started, George Evans announced they would be heading back to town. "Nonsense," Rebecca Johnson declared. "The dancing's just beginning, and it's a lovely night. Surely you can stay a while longer." Darlene looked pleadingly at her father, who hesitated, then relented. "1 hour," he said, "then we must return." The musicians struck up a lively reel, and couples formed sets for dancing. Darlene found herself partnered with Jacob Miller's oldest son, a shy young man who stepped on her toes twice before finding his rhythm. As they moved through the figures of the dance, she caught glimpses of Owen, standing at the edge of the gathering, watching the festivities with a slight smile. When the dance ended, Darlene excused herself to get a cup of water. As she stood by the refreshment table, she felt a presence beside her. "Would you honor me with the next dance, Miss Evans?" Owen asked quietly. Darlene glanced at her father, deep in conversation with Sheriff Hollister, who had arrived late but in good spirits. "I would be delighted, Mr. Tucker." As luck would have it, the next dance was a waltz more intimate than the reels and square dances that had preceded it. When Owen placed his hand lightly at her waist and took her other hand in his, Darlene felt a jolt of awareness that took her breath away. "I never properly thanked you," Owen said as they began to move to the music. "For what?" she asked, acutely conscious of his nearness. "For seeing me as I am trying to be, not as I was." His blue eyes held hers. "It's a rare gift." "Perhaps I simply believe people can change when they truly want to," Darlene replied. Owen's hand tightened slightly on hers. "And I believe some people come into our lives at exactly the right moment, like rain after drought." The intensity of his gaze made her heart race. Around them, other couples danced, but Darlene barely noticed them, lost in the connection between herself and this complicated man who had somehow become so important to her in such a short time. "Mr. Tucker Owen," she began, but was interrupted when the music suddenly stopped. A commotion had broken out at the edge of the dancing area. 3 men, strangers to Shoshone City, stood facing the crowd. The central figure, a tall man with a drooping mustache and cold eyes, stepped forward. "Well, well," he called, his voice carrying across the now silent gathering. "Quite a civilized affair you've got here, Tucker. Almost didn't recognize you without a gun in your hand." Owen had gone very still beside Darlene. Gently he released her and stepped forward. "Harmon," he said, his voice controlled, "what brings you to my property?" The man Harmon laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Your property, that's rich. Heard you were playing rancher these days, but I didn't believe it until now." He surveyed the crowd with contemptuous eyes. "These good folks know who they're breaking bread with." Sheriff Hollister moved to stand beside Owen. "I don't know you, mister, but this is a peaceful gathering. State your business or move along." Harmon ignored him, his focus still on Owen. "My business is with Tucker here. We've got unfinished matters from Colorado." "Whatever happened in Colorado stays there," Owen replied evenly. "I've left that life behind." "Have you now?" Harmon's hand hovered near his holstered pistol. "Tell that to my brother." "Oh wait, you can't, he's 6 feet under thanks to you." A murmur ran through the crowd. Darlene felt her father's hand on her arm as he pulled her back, away from the confrontation. "Your brother drew on me first," Owen said, his voice still measured but with an edge of steel now. As you well know, I was cleared by the law. Law, Harmon spat. What does the law know about justice? Sheriff Hollister stepped forward. That's enough. I'm the law in Shoshone City and I'm telling you to leave. Come back tomorrow if you have legitimate business with Mr. Tucker. For a tense moment, it seemed Harmon might draw his weapon. His companions shifted nervously, hands near their guns. Then abruptly he relaxed and smiled coldly. No rush, he said. Just wanted to see the famous Owen Tucker in his new life, playing the respectable rancher courting pretty ladies. His gaze flickered to Darlene, making her skin crawl. We'll talk again, Tucker, count on it. With that, he and his companions turned and walked toward their horses. The crowd remained silent until they had ridden away, then erupted in nervous conversation. Owen's face was grim as he approached Darlene and her father. I apologize for that intrusion, he said. James Harmon has a grudge against me from a justified shooting 3 years ago. His brother was rustling cattle and fired on me when I caught him. George Evans studied Owen with unreadable eyes. Seems your past isn't as far behind you as you'd hoped, Mr. Tucker. No, sir, it appears not, Owen acknowledged. I'm sorry your daughter was exposed to this ugliness. Darlene stepped forward. I'm not a child to be sheltered, Mr. Tucker. Are you in danger? Harmon talks more than he acts, Owen replied, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced of this. But I think it best if the festivities end for tonight. I don't want to risk anyone's safety, George nodded. A wise decision. Come, Darlene. As they prepared to leave, Darlene managed a moment alone with Owen. Will you be all right? She asked softly, his expression softened as he looked at her. I've handled worse. Don't worry about me. Too late for that advice, she replied with a small smile. Owen's eyes held hers. Darlene, it might be best if you kept your distance for a while until I sort this out. Is that what you want? She asked, heart sinking. What I want, he said quietly, and what's safest for you are two different things. Before she could respond, her father called her name. With a last look at Owen, Darlene joined George in their wagon, her mind troubled and her heart conflicted as they drove back to town in silence. The following week passed slowly for Darlene. No one had seen Harmon or his companions since the barn raising, but the incident had rekindled all the old gossip about Owen Tucker's past. The mercantile buzzed with speculation, much of it wilder than the truth. Darlene maintained a dignified silence in the face of questions and insinuations, focusing on her work and the young girls she tutored. But her thoughts constantly drifted to Owen, wondering if he was safe, if Harmon had returned to make good on his veiled threats. It was Thursday afternoon when Sheriff Hollister entered the mercantile, his expression grave. Darlene's heart lurched at the sight of him. Is something wrong, Sheriff? She asked, setting aside the inventory she'd been reviewing. Nothing immediate, he replied, but I thought you and your father should know. I received a telegram from the sheriff in Denver. Seems this Harmon fellow has quite a reputation, not a good one. He's suspected in several shootings, though nothing's been proven. George Evans emerged from the storeroom, concern etched on his features. Has there been trouble? Not yet, Hollister said, but I'd rather be prepared. I've deputized 2 men to help keep an eye out. Have either of you seen Tucker in town this week? Darlene shook her head. Not since the barn raising. I rode out to his place yesterday, the sheriff continued. He's continuing work on the barn, going about his business, says he doesn't think Harmon will cause real trouble, but he's staying alert. After the sheriff left, Darlene turned to her father. I'm worried about him, George Evans sighed heavily. As am I, daughter, as am I. Darlene looked up in surprise. You are. Tucker handled himself well during that confrontation, her father admitted. Didn't rise to the bait, tried to defuse the situation. That shows character. He hesitated. And I've been giving thought to what you said about fresh starts. This territory was built by people seeking second chances. Hope flared in Darlene's chest. What are you saying, father? I'm saying that perhaps I've been too quick to judge the man based on stories rather than what I've seen with my own eyes. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You've always had good instincts about people, Darlene. If you see something worthwhile in Owen Tucker, then maybe it's there to be seen. Tears pricked at Darlene's eyes. Thank you, Father. Don't thank me yet, he warned. There's still the matter of Harmon and whatever trouble he might bring, and the town won't change its opinion overnight. The town doesn't have to, Darlene replied firmly. Only we do. Later that evening, as Darlene was closing up the store, the door opened to admit Rebecca Johnson, her normally cheerful face tight with worry. Darlene, she said without preamble, have you heard? Those men Harmon and his friends, they're back. Tom saw them at the saloon an hour ago, asking questions about Tucker's ranch. Darlene's stomach knotted with fear. Has anyone warned Owen? Sheriff Hollister sent young Billy Carson out there, but the boy came back saying Tucker wasn't at the ranch. Rebecca wrung her hands. No one knows where he is. I need to find my father, Darlene said, moving to lock the store. Rebecca caught her arm. There's more. They were asking about you too, saying ugly things about your association with Tucker. Cold dread washed over Darlene. Me, why would they care about me? Harmon's got it in his head that you mean something to Tucker, Rebecca explained grimly. Says he's going to take everything Tucker values before he kills him. Darlene's mind raced. If Harmon thought she was important to Owen, she could be in danger, but more immediately, Owen needed to be warned. Where's the sheriff now, watching the saloon? He told me to tell you to stay home with your father tonight, doors locked. Rebecca hesitated. Darlene, be careful. These aren't men who play by any rules. After Rebecca left, Darlene paced the store, torn between obedience to the sheriff's instructions and her urgent need to warn Owen. She was still deliberating when her father returned from a town council meeting. You've heard, he asked, seeing her troubled face. Darlene nodded. Father, Owen doesn't know they're back. No one can find him to warn him. George studied his daughter, seeing the determination in her eyes. And you want to go looking for him? I think I know where he might be, she admitted. The day of the storm, he mentioned a spot near the creek where he goes to think. Absolutely not, her father said firmly. It's too dangerous. The sheriff will find him. But what if he doesn't? What if Harmon finds him first? Darlene's voice rose with urgency. Father, please understand. I can't sit here doing nothing when he might be in danger. George Evans looked at his daughter for a long moment, then sighed deeply. You're just like your mother, stubborn as a mule when your mind's made up. He moved to a cabinet behind the counter and unlocked it, removing a small revolver. Take this, your mother's gun, and you are not to go alone. I'm coming with you. Relief flooded through Darlene. Thank you, Father. They left a note for Sheriff Hollister explaining their destination, then took their wagon out of town as dusk fell. The creek Darlene had mentioned ran along the western edge of Owen's property, and she directed her father toward a stand of cottonwoods where the water pooled in a quiet bend. As they approached, Darlene spotted Owen's chestnut gelding tethered among the trees. Her heart leaped. He's here. George pulled the wagon to a halt some distance away. Stay behind me, he instructed as they dismounted. They moved quietly toward the creek, and soon Darlene caught sight of Owen sitting on a fallen log beside the water, seemingly lost in thought. Relief washed over her. Owen, she called, hurrying forward despite her father's warning. Owen's head snapped up, his expression changing from surprise to alarm when he saw them. Darlene, Mr. Evans, what are you doing out here? Harmon's back, Darlene explained quickly. He and his men were in town asking about you and about me. Owen stood, his face hardening. Are you all right? Did they approach you? We're fine, George assured him, but the sheriff is concerned. Harmon's been making threats. Owen ran a hand through his hair, his expression grim. I should have expected this. He's not the type to let go of a grudge. He looked at Darlene, his eyes softening with concern. I'm sorry you've been dragged into this. It's not your fault, she replied firmly. We should return to town, George said, looking around nervously. Strength in numbers. Owen nodded, moving to untie his horse. I'll escort you back, then speak with the sheriff about how to handle Harmon. They had just started toward the wagon when the crack of a rifle shot echoed across the creek. Dirt kicked up at Owen's feet and he reacted instantly, pushing Darlene toward the cover of the trees. Get down. He shouted as another shot rang out. George Evans pulled his daughter behind the thick trunk of a cottonwood, his own body shielding hers. Owen drew his revolver and fired in the direction of the shots, then darted to another tree for cover. "Told you we'd talk again, Tucker." Harmon's voice called from across the creek. "Brought some friends to even the odds. This is between us, Harmon," Owen shouted back. "Let the Evans go." "Now, why would I do that?" came the mocking reply. "Especially when I've got such a pretty bargaining chip." Darlene felt her blood run cold. She couldn't see Harmon from their position, but his voice seemed to be moving, circling around their location. Owen caught her eye across the small clearing and gestured urgently toward the wagon. His meaning was clear. They needed to make a break for it while he provided covering fire. George nodded his understanding, gripping Darlene's arm. "When I say run, head straight for the wagon," he whispered. "Don't look back." "I can't leave Owen," she protested. "You'll do as I say," her father replied firmly. "Tucker can handle himself." Another shot cracked through the trees, splintering bark near Owen's head. He returned fire, then nodded to George. "Now," George hissed, pulling Darlene up and pushing her toward the wagon. They ran, keeping low as Owen fired repeatedly to cover their retreat. They had almost reached the wagon when a figure stepped out from behind it, one of Harmon's men, his gun aimed directly at them. "Going somewhere," he sneered. George Evans reacted with unexpected speed, shoving Darlene aside and charging the gunman. The two men collided as a shot rang out. Darlene screamed as her father staggered but continued grappling with the attacker. Owen appeared beside her, firing at another man who had emerged from the trees. "Get to the wagon," he ordered, pushing her forward as he moved to help her father. Darlene scrambled toward the vehicle, fumbling in her pocket for her mother's revolver. As she reached the wagon, she turned to see her father and the gunman still struggling. Owen was exchanging fire with another attacker, pinned down behind a tree. Then Harmon himself appeared at the edge of the clearing, his rifle aimed at Owen's exposed position. Without thinking, Darlene raised her small revolver and fired. The shot went wide, but it was enough to startle Harmon, causing his own shot to miss. He whirled toward her, face contorted with rage. "The lady wants to play," he growled, swinging his rifle in her direction. Owen broke cover, firing repeatedly. Harmon staggered as one bullet found its mark, but he kept his footing, returning fire as he retreated into the trees. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 2 minutes, but to Darlene, it felt like hours. As sudden silence fell over the creek, she realized the third gunman had fled. "Father," she cried, running to where George Evans was sitting on the ground, clutching his arm. Blood seeped between his fingers. "Just grazed me," he grunted, though his pale face suggested the wound was more serious than he admitted. Owen hurried to them, scanning the trees for further threats. "We need to get him to town," he said urgently. "Can you drive the wagon?" Darlene nodded, helping her father to his feet. The man he'd fought lay unconscious or dead nearby, but she couldn't bring herself to look closely. Owen helped George into the wagon, then quickly tied his horse to the back. "I'll keep watch while you drive," he said, climbing up beside Darlene. "They may still be out there." As they started toward town, Owen kept his revolver ready, eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This is exactly what I feared would happen." "You didn't ask for this," Darlene replied, focusing on guiding the horses along the darkening road. "No, but my past brought it to your door nonetheless." He looked at her father, who was leaning back against the wagon seat, his face drawn with pain. "Mr. Evans, I can't express how sorry I am that you've been hurt." George managed a weak smile. Hadn't been in a real fight since the war, getting too old for it now. Despite the tension, Darlene felt a surge of love for her father, his courage, his acceptance of Owen even in this dire situation. They reached Shoshone City without further incident and headed straight for Dr. Harris's house. The commotion of their arrival brought the doctor to his door, and Sheriff Hollister appeared moments later, having spotted them from his office window, while Dr. Harris tended to George's wound, a deep graze that required stitches, but had thankfully missed anything vital. Darlene and Owen recounted the ambush to the sheriff. "Harmon was hit," Owen concluded. Not sure how badly, but he was bleeding when he retreated. Hollister nodded grimly. We found their horses at the livery. They won't get far on foot, especially with one of them wounded. I'll organize a search party at first light. And the man at the creek? Darlene asked hesitantly. I'll send someone to check, the sheriff replied. Did you recognize him, Tucker? Owen shook his head. Hired gun, most likely. Harmon was never one to do all his own dirty work. After the sheriff left, Darlene and Owen waited in tense silence for news of her father. When Dr. Harris finally emerged from his treatment room, his expression was reassuring. He'll be fine, the doctor said. Lost some blood, but the bullet didn't hit anything important. He needs rest and time to heal. Relief flooded through Darlene. Can I see him? Briefly, Dr. Harris replied. He's tired from the laudanum I gave him for the pain. Owen touched Darlene's arm gently. I'll wait outside. Take your time with your father. George Evans was pale but alert when Darlene entered the treatment room. His left arm was heavily bandaged and resting in a sling. There's my brave girl, he said with a weak smile. Tears filled Darlene's eyes as she sat beside him. Oh, Father, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault if I hadn't insisted on warning Owen. Nonsense, he interrupted. If we hadn't gone, Tucker might be dead now and possibly us too if Harmon had come looking afterward. He reached for her hand with his good arm. Sometimes the right choice still leads to difficult consequences. Darlene squeezed his hand. Dr. Harris says you'll recover fully. Of course I will, he replied with forced cheerfulness. Takes more than a bullet to keep a stubborn old quartermaster down. His expression grew serious. Tucker behaved honorably out there, risked himself to protect us both. Yes, Darlene said softly. He did. George studied his daughter's face. You love him, don't you? The question caught her off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. I think I do, she admitted, feeling a weight lift as she spoke the truth aloud. Is that foolish of me? Love often is, her father replied with unexpected gentleness. But that doesn't make it wrong, he sighed. When your mother died, I thought I'd never feel anything but grief again. You reminded me there was still joy in the world. He squeezed her hand. If Tucker makes you feel joy, then who am I to stand in the way? Tears spilled down Darlene's cheeks. The town will talk. Let them, George said firmly. We'll weather it together as we always have. When Darlene emerged from the treatment room, she found Owen in conversation with Sheriff Hollister, who had returned with news. The man at the creek is alive, Hollister was saying, unconscious but breathing. I've got him locked up at the jail. And Harmon? Owen asked. No sign yet, the sheriff replied. But we've got men watching all the roads out of town. He won't get far. He turned to Darlene. How's your father? Resting comfortably, she said. Dr. Harris says he'll recover completely. Hollister nodded, then fixed Owen with a serious look. Tucker, I want you to stay in town tonight where I can keep an eye on things. The hotel has a room available. Owen looked like he might protest, then nodded. All right, Sheriff, but I want to be part of the search party tomorrow. We'll see, Hollister replied noncommittally before taking his leave. Left alone with Owen, Darlene suddenly felt the full weight of the evening's events crash down upon her. She swayed slightly on her feet, and Owen was immediately at her side, his arm supporting her. You need rest, he said gently. Let me take you home. I should stay with Father, she protested weakly. Dr. Harris has a nurse watching him tonight, Owen reminded her, and you're exhausted. You'll be no good to your father if you collapse from fatigue. Reluctantly, Darlene allowed Owen to escort her home. The streets of Shoshone City were unusually quiet, news of the shooting having driven most residents indoors. A few curious faces peered from windows as they passed, but Darlene was too tired to care about the gossip that would surely follow. At the door to the Mercantile, Owen hesitated. Will you be all right alone? I could ask Mrs. Johnson to stay with you. I'll be fine, Darlene assured him, though the thought of being alone in the empty apartment above the store was unsettling after the day's violence. Owen studied her face, concern evident in his eyes. Darlene, about what happened today, I never wanted to put you or your father in danger. I know that, she said softly. Once Harmon is caught, it might be best if I leave Shoshone City, he continued, his voice low and pained. Start fresh somewhere else where my past won't endanger the people he stopped, unable to finish the sentence. The people you what? Darlene asked, her heart pounding. Owen's blue eyes met hers, vulnerable and honest. The people I love. The word hung between them, a confession and a promise. If you leave, Darlene said carefully, would you ask me to go with you? Surprise flickered across Owen's face, followed by a wave of emotion. I would never presume because I would, she interrupted. Go with you, I mean, if you asked. Owen stepped closer, his hand gently touching her cheek. Darlene Evans, you deserve better than a life on the run with a man like me. I deserve to choose my own path, she replied firmly, and I choose you, Owen Tucker, past, present, and future. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, then deepened with all the emotion they had both been restraining. When they finally parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. I should go, he whispered reluctantly. The sheriff's waiting and you need rest. Darlene nodded, though letting him walk away was the last thing she wanted. Promise me you'll be careful tomorrow. I promise, he replied, kissing her once more before reluctantly stepping back. Lock your door behind me. She watched from the window as Owen walked toward the hotel, only turning away when he was safely inside. Despite the day's terrors and the uncertainty that still lay ahead, Darlene felt a strange peace settle over her. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The town of Shoshone City awoke the next morning to news that shocked even the most seasoned gossips. James Harmon had been found dead at the edge of town, his body concealed in a stand of brush near the creek. The cause of death was blood loss from the wound Owen had inflicted during the previous night's confrontation. Sheriff Hollister delivered the news himself to Darlene as she prepared to visit her father at the doctor's house. His remaining companion is gone, the sheriff added. Likely fled when Harmon couldn't continue. The one we captured has already confessed they were hired by Harmon specifically to target Tucker and you. Darlene's hands trembled slightly as she fastened her cloak. So it's over. It appears so, Hollister confirmed. Though there will need to be an inquest, of course, just a formality in this case, clearly self-defense. When Darlene arrived at Dr. Harris's house, she found her father awake and in better spirits, though still weak from his ordeal. To her surprise, Owen was already there, deep in conversation with George. Darlene, her father called, smiling as she entered. Tucker here has been telling me about his plans for the ranch, quite ambitious. Owen rose from his chair, a mixture of relief and happiness washing over his face at the sight of her. I was just explaining my idea for expanding the cattle operation next spring. You've decided to stay then? Darlene asked, her heart lifting. Owen glanced at her father, then back to her. If I'm welcome. You are, George said firmly, surprising them both. In fact, I was just suggesting that once I'm recovered, I might be interested in investing in your venture. I've always thought the mercantile could benefit from diversification. The conversation that followed was full of plans and possibilities, with none of the awkwardness or tension that had characterized their previous interactions. George Evans, it seemed, had completely reassessed his opinion of Owen Tucker. Later, as they walked together from the doctor's house toward the mercantile, Owen explained. Your father offered me his blessing this morning, he said, still sounding slightly amazed. Said any man who would risk his life for his daughter and take a bullet for him had proven his worth. He's right, Darlene replied, slipping her hand into Owen's. Though I already knew your worth before all of that. They paused in the middle of the street, uncaring of the curious stares from passers-by. The morning sun bathed Shoshone City in golden light, transforming even the most ordinary buildings into something beautiful. What happens now? Darlene asked softly. Owen's eyes held hers, serious yet filled with hope. Now I prove to this town and to you that I'm worthy of the second chance I've been given, that I can be the man you believe me to be. You already are that man, she assured him. He shook his head slightly. There's still work to be done, a life to build. He hesitated, then continued, a future to offer you if you'll have it. Darlene's heart soared at the implication. Is that a proposal, Mr. Tucker? Not yet, he replied with a smile. When I propose, it will be properly done with a ring and your father's formal blessing. But it is a promise that I intend to be worthy of you, Darlene Evans, in the eyes of this town and in my own. The town said you didn't deserve me, Darlene reminded him, echoing the whispers that had followed them since their first interactions. Owen's expression grew determined. Then I'll just have to prove them wrong. We'll prove them wrong together, she corrected, standing on tiptoe to kiss him lightly, heedless of the scandalized gasps from Mrs. Wilson and her friends watching from the millinery shop across the street. In the months that followed, Owen Tucker did indeed set about proving himself to Shoshone City. The completed barn became a gathering place for community events. His cattle operation grew steadily, providing employment for several local men. He contributed generously to the new school building and joined the town council when a seat became available. George Evans recovered fully from his wound and, true to his word, became a partner in Owen's ranching venture. The mercantile thrived under their combined business acumen, expanding its inventory to serve the growing community. As for Darlene, she continued to teach the young girls of Shoshone City, instilling in them the belief that education was as important for women as for men. She also took on more responsibility at the mercantile, introducing innovations that increased their business considerably. The gossip about Owen and Darlene gradually transformed from scandalized whispers to admiring observations. The couple's devotion to each other became something of a romantic legend in the town, especially after the dramatic events surrounding Harmon's attack. On a crisp autumn day, 1 year after Owen had purchased the Hargrove property, he fulfilled his promise. With George Evans's enthusiastic blessing and a sapphire ring ordered from Denver, he proposed to Darlene beneath the cottonwood trees by the creek where they had once fought for their lives. Their wedding in the spring of 1877 was the social event of the year in Shoshone City. Even those who had once condemned their relationship couldn't resist attending, won over by the undeniable evidence of Owen's reformation and the couple's obvious happiness. As Darlene and Owen exchanged vows in the newly built church, Margaret Wilson leaned toward Rebecca Johnson and whispered, "I must admit I was wrong about him. He's proven to be a fine man after all." Rebecca smiled knowingly. Darlene always saw what the rest of us missed. "She told me once when the town said he didn't deserve me, I knew he just needed the chance to prove them wrong." "And so he has," Margaret conceded with surprising graciousness. "So he has." The reception was held at the Tucker Ranch, now a thriving operation with a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. The barn that had been raised through community effort was decorated with wildflowers and lanterns, filled with music and laughter as the people of Shoshone City celebrated with the couple who had defied expectations and changed hearts. As twilight fell, Owen led his bride in a waltz reminiscent of their first dance a year earlier. "Happy Mrs. Tucker," he murmured, holding her close. "Completely," Darlene replied, her eyes shining with joy, "though I do have news that might make us even happier." Owen's steps faltered slightly. "News? Dr. Harris confirmed it yesterday," she whispered, her cheeks flushing. "We'll be welcoming a little Tucker around Christmas time." The look of wonder that transformed Owen's face was something Darlene knew she would treasure for the rest of her life. He pulled her closer, uncaring of the propriety they were supposed to maintain as host and hostess. "I love you, Darlene Tucker," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, resting her head against his chest. "My stubborn, honorable cowboy who proved them all wrong." Their life together unfolded with all the challenges and joys typical of the Wyoming Territory in the late 1800s. Their first child, a son they named George after Darlene's father, was born on a snowy December night in 1877. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Eleanor, named for Owen's mother. The Tucker Ranch prospered, eventually becoming one of the largest operations in the county. Owen's fair treatment of his workers and honest business practices earned him a reputation that completely overshadowed his past. By the time Wyoming achieved statehood in 1890, Owen Tucker was considered one of Shoshone City's most respected citizens, serving as mayor for 2 terms and helping to guide the town's growth into the new century. Darlene's educational efforts expanded beyond informal tutoring to the establishment of Shoshone City's first proper high school, where she served as headmistress until their 3rd child, Robert, was born in 1883. Her insistence on equal educational opportunities for girls was revolutionary for the time but gradually accepted as her students went on to successful careers and marriages strengthened by their learning. George Evans lived to see all 3 of his grandchildren grow to adulthood, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1898 at the age of 80. The Mercantile, now run by Owen and Darlene's eldest son, continued to serve as the commercial heart of Shoshone City well into the 20th century. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1902, the town of Shoshone City held a celebration in honor of Owen and Darlene Tucker. The couple, still deeply in love after a quarter-century together, were presented with a commemorative plaque acknowledging their contributions to the community. As they stood together on the steps of the town hall, surrounded by family, friends, and neighbors who had once judged them so harshly, Darlene squeezed Owen's hand and whispered, "Not bad for a gunslinger and a headstrong merchant's daughter." Owen's laugh was warm and full of contentment. "We did prove them wrong, didn't we?" "Beyond a doubt," she agreed, thinking of their 3 children, now grown with promising futures ahead of them. The ranch that had become a legacy to pass on, and the respect they had earned through years of integrity and hard work. But most of all, she thought of the love they had fought for, and won a love that had never dimmed, but only grown stronger through every triumph and challenge they had faced together. A love that had transformed not only their own lives, but the heart of an entire community. As the celebration continued around them, Owen drew Darlene close and kissed her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. "Thank you," he murmured against her lips. "For what?" she asked, smiling up at the man who had captured her heart amid scandal and danger so many years ago. "For believing in me when no one else would," he replied simply. "For giving me a reason to become the man I am today." "I always knew you had it in you," Darlene said, her eyes shining with love and pride. "All you needed was someone to stand beside you while you showed the world." And as they walked together among their friends and family, their hands intertwined and their hearts beating as one, the whispers that followed them were no longer of scandal and disapproval, but of admiration for a love that had endured against all odds, a testament to the power of second chances and the courage to defy expectations. In Shoshone City, Wyoming, the story of Owen and Darlene Tucker became legend, passed down through generations as proof that sometimes the heart sees what is invisible to the eye, and that a love strong enough to withstand judgment and danger can transform not only 2 lives but an entire community's understanding of redemption and worth.